Let's go right now to the hotline. We're joined by Trevor Knight to talk a little bit about A&M, a little Oklahoma, a little football in general. Trevor, good morning, man.
David, good morning. Good to see you this morning.
How you been, man?
Man, I'm doing well. Life is good. Having a blast up here in North Dallas, raising a little guy, and no complaints, man. How are you guys?
We're wonderful, man. So I'm trying to remember, what game did I see you at? There was a game I saw you at on the sidelines. We're like, we got to get you on the show soon. And we waited 8 months. So that's on me. I have to apologize to you.
Yeah, there's probably a couple that we ran into each other, but I'm glad that even though it has been a little bit of a time lapse, that we're back together. I always love getting on here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. How old's your son now, by the way?
He's 15 months old. He's a little Tasmanian devil. He's running around like crazy. So we're having a blast.
That's wonderful. So both of your teams, right? And I think it's fair to say both of your teams are expected to have bounce back years. Let's take them in parts. We'll start off with Texas A&M. What are your expectations this year?
Yeah, I'll start by saying this. Last year was tough. Not many times for schools like Oklahoma and A&M both are you having one of those teams lose on a weekend, but multiple times having them both lose. So I took some heartburn medication, and hopefully this year we'll bounce back. But for the Aggies, obviously a lot of places that we can improve. I think some of the additions here in the offseason are really exciting. Obviously, a big one being Bobby Petrino taking over the helm there, calling the plays. But also just some guys that we have already on the roster that are going to step into their own. And obviously, you look at the quarterback position in Connor Weigman. I obviously played that position. I understand what having another offseason, building that confidence, building that timing with your receivers, and really just stepping up as a leader can do for a player. And so I'm looking at him, amongst others, to have a huge breakout season and add some more wins to that win column for us.
As a sophomore, but with some experience, like, can he be the guy, though, to lead them and have a chance in the SEC West?
I believe he can. You look at not only his highlights from high school, that's come and gone. He's a college football player now, right? But the tools that he possesses, the way that he carries himself, I look at that a lot. He has the ability to be a magnet to the rest of that offense and the rest of that team. The timidity that he had as a young guy this past year showed a little bit, but given the kind of the reins moving forward, if he develops that confidence, or rather gets that confidence back, he's going to be, like I said, that magnet to this program where everybody just gravitates to him, and they can go a long way.
Trevor, I think he's going to be great, but I don't even think he has to be great when you think about the players around him, that receiving core, the backfield. It doesn't have Devon Achane, but there's some dogs back there. But especially that receiving core, including the tight ends, he needs to just be good enough, and I think he's going to be better than that.
That's right. Yeah, sometimes, especially in today's day and age, we look at the quarterback to be the superhero too often, right? And don't get me wrong, I am biased, but a lot does run through your quarterback. But at the end of the day, the quarterbacks that play the best football distribute the football to the playmakers. And like you just said, A&M's got plenty of playmakers on the outside in the backfield. If he can just manage the game, make the big plays when they're called upon, but get the ball in those playmakers' hands, we can put up some serious points.
Tell me if this is your kind of emotions around the Bobby Petrino hire. There was the initial, excuse me, what? Like, they're getting who? He's a head coach somewhere, right? To, like, everybody I talked to, like, oh, yeah, I think it's going to work. And not just work, it's going to work in a big way. Tell me kind of your train of thought when it came to Petrino coming to A&M.
Yeah, I think I shared that same sentiment with most of the Aggie Nation, right? Was a little, not put off, but I thought, man, culturally, does this fit? I sat back and I thought, you know what? Yes, there's some blemishes. We all have blemishes in the past. Maybe it's not just an absolute home run, step in, be a part of exactly what we have going on, right? Hoorahs and all that type of stuff. But you look at the track record of Bobby Petrino and what he's been able to do on the offensive side of the football, and I don't think there's a better home run hire at this time, right? Yeah, you go out, hire one of these younger guys that are maybe putting up a bunch of points in different conference and things like that. But Bobby Petrino, he's tried, he's true. And he, if anybody else, can get an offense that, call it struggling, call it not, need to put up points this year, put it that way. And I think he's the man for the job. So, yeah, initial shock, well, we'll see how this happens. But as I've continued to read into it and think about it, I'm really excited for his development of this offense this year.
Talking to Trevor Knight here on TexAgs Radio. All right, let's make a case for Oklahoma. Why should they have a bounce-back year?
Well, I think you look at the same type of issues, very different but similar. You got a brand new head coach that comes in. He's got to kind of develop his culture, right? And then you have a coach that leaves, kind of in the middle of the night and takes some big pieces of the puzzle with him, and Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams and others that go out there to USC. I still believe in Brent Venables as a defensive play caller and a defensive mind. The track record that he had, not only back in the day at Oklahoma, but for all of his tenure at Clemson, he knows what he's doing. And so I think just another year in the system, time, getting the guys to buy in is going to prove well for the Sooners up there in their last year competing in the Big 12 before they step up with the big boys in the SEC.
All right, so let's follow up with that. How real is it going to get for both Oklahoma and Texas? They're recruiting at a high level. There's no doubt about that. But it's one thing to take on two elite teams. When you're taking on a team, every week in the SEC is that grind.
Yeah, I do have that unique perspective in that I played in both conferences. And I will say that the top of the Big 12, the Oklahomas, the Texas, and then let's throw in an Oklahoma State or a Baylor or even this past year, a TCU, every couple of years. The top of the top can compete in any conference. But week by week in the SEC, you are not going to a Lawrence, Kansas. You're not going to, a down West Virginia team. You're going to big-time venues, big-time players, and it's a gauntlet. And so I think where they're going to feel it the most in the beginning is not necessarily from a competitive standpoint, but just from an attrition standpoint. Keeping guys healthy. They're going to have to play 4 quarters, whereas, you're maybe playing a half or 3 quarters and eliminating some injury in Lawrence. You're going to have a roster that's more banged up the second half of the year, and they're just going to have to figure out how to manage that. I'm excited to see the way they compete. A&M did coming into the SEC. I think there's going to be some success, maybe some failure. But overall, I think it's a great move for college football. And for me, getting to watch my alma maters maybe square off here in the coming years is going to be exciting as well.
So A&M, I think, has got a nice first year in 2024. But I look at Oklahoma. That schedule, it looks pretty daunting. Did you take a look at the 24 schedule?
I have, yeah. But, to the point that we just talked about, right, you're going to have to step up every week anyways. Hopefully Brent can get those guys back on track this year so that they can come in and compete. Now, you're going to have a quarterback change, which is tough, going into a new conference. Dylan Gabriel is going to be out. They've got some promising guys on the roster. Strap on your big boy shoes because here we go. I will say that.
Do you buy the hype this year around the University of Texas?
I never buy the hype around the University of Texas, David. Come on, you know that. I don't. I think that they have good players, which they always do. I like Steve Sarkisian. I'll say that. I got to play for Sark when I was with the Atlanta Falcons. He's a phenomenal football mind. But as I've said time and time again, I think that the problems in Austin permeate so much deeper than just that locker room and just those players and just the coaching staff. It's a systemic issue. And I'll say this too, and I've got a lot of buddies and a lot of people in this industry that scoff at me when I say this. I'm still not a huge believer in Quinn Ewers. I think he's a good player. I think you can win football games with him, but the hype surrounding Quinn being a potential Heisman candidate and those types of things, I just don't see that yet. So he could prove me wrong. They could prove me wrong. I'm just not believing the hype right now.
How about in 2023? How vulnerable do you think is the West with quarterback questions all over the place, and Alabama trying to figure out They got all the 5 stars in the world, but they don't know their quarterback situation. LSU should be fine. Arkansas lost a lot of players. Like, just overall, how open do you see the West?
I think it's wide open. I think even this past year we were looking at an Alabama team that was somewhat held together by the glue of their quarterback. Right. I think Bryce Young was possibly the best quarterback that's come through Alabama that we've seen in the last several decades. The way the guy could just take over a game, right? They didn't have as daunting of a defense as they've had in the past. They didn't have as powerful of a run attack or as touted receivers as they've had in years past. It was all held together by the glue of Bryce Young. And so now you remove him from the equation, they will have guys step up. It will be a very difficult atmosphere when you go to Bryant Denny. But amongst them and the other teams in the West, to your point, I think if a team can get on track and build the culture of winning in the second half of football games, then it could be some new logos up there at the end, fighting for that SEC West position in the championship game.
Remind me of the crossover in Lincoln Riley. He was there your last year at Oklahoma, right?
He was, yeah. He was the offensive coordinator my last year up there at OU.
What do you expect from him at USC this year in particular?
Man, he's a phenomenal play caller. I'll say that. I watched several of their games this past year, and arguably the best offense in college football. And I think you could argue that coming into this year with Caleb, returning, that they're in that number one position. Their defense was just abysmal. I watched their game live against Tulane in the bowl game, and then obviously, in the Pac-12 title game against Utah, and they couldn't tackle anybody. I thought they looked lost. So do I expect them to put up huge points this year? Yes. If they can be marginally better on the defensive side of the ball, they're my favorite to win the Pac-12. And, they've obviously got some changes upcoming too with conference realignment and going to the Big Ten. So I think they could win the Pac-12 and make a splash, but they've got to get better on the defensive side of the ball.
Trevor, last thing for you. I know we've probably talked about it at some point, but has your opinion evolved or changed at all about the way the transfer portal has changed the way college football goes, and the fact that you were able to take advantage of it in a different way at a different time? Just do you have opinions on the portal, the way it's going?
I do have opinions. I think that there's some really good and some really bad. And I don't think that you can necessarily pin the transfer portal on its own. You have to put NIL in with that, which adds another dimension. And I'm a fan of some of the stories that come out of it and some of the opportunities that these young men and women across different sports are getting. But holistically, I'm still not a fan of the way that it's being run. I think it's putting some of the guys that aren't big names and gals that aren't big names in a very tough position, and it may effectively ruin their college experience. So overall, not a fan. I am a fan of some of the stories that come out of it, though.
Trevor, man, I appreciate your time. I hope to see you at a game soon and get you back on the show.
Appreciate you having me on, David. Good talking as always. Thanks.